My name is Ted Burns, and I'm Senior Director of Political Affairs and RADPAC for the American College of Radiology Association, and I want to welcome you to our RADVOCACY podcast hosted by RADPAC. Our goal with the podcast is to give you a behind-the-scenes look into the various advocacy efforts of the college, our members, and insights from political influencers here in Washington, D.C. Hi, I'm honored today to have with us the CEO of the ACR, Dr. Bill Thorwarth. Welcome, Dr. Thorwarth. How are you?
Great to be with you, Ted. Thanks for the opportunity.
Of course. So, Dr. Thorwarth, we do this pretty commonly when we do these podcasts. Before we get into the primary discussion, I'll often ask our guests just to give us a little background about themselves. You're probably a little bit more of a unique situation as a guest than most of our others in the sense that everyone knows who you are, where oftentimes our guests are people who aren't as visible as yourself in the space of radiology. So, even with that being said, if you want to talk a little bit about your background, where you're from, where you're trained, a subspecialty when you practiced, and where you practiced before you joined the ACR as the CEO, that would be great. And don't forget to mention any favorite sports teams that you and I share.
Absolutely, Ted. No, I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and Ted and I share that. So I'm a lifelong Phillies and Eagles fan, despite having moved around quite a bit over the course of my career. So, yeah, but after that, went to undergraduate medical school at Dartmouth in New Hampshire. Great experience there. I recognized during my between my first and second year of medical school, I was really interested in radiology. My father was a radiologist, and I wanted to be sure that I was not kind of doing that to follow in his footsteps. So I did an elective project with the radiology department at Dartmouth that summer, and really had a great experience and was convinced that that's what I wanted to do for the remainder of my career. But the other thing that I discovered during that was that the radiologists in the department who had done some clinical medicine along their training or in military experience or otherwise seemed to relate better to the referring physicians. So I decided that I would go ahead and train in internal medicine first coming out of medical school, which I did at Penn State's program in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And I think that gave me a good background. I also had signed up with the National Health Service Corps on a program. They had to pay for my medical school tuition, get off my father's back as far as that goes. But I would then be obligated to go work for them or pay them back. Anyway, when I finished my internal medicine training, I then indicated I wanted to go into radiology, but the National Health Service Corps wanted primary care physicians, and I ended up electing actually to do emergency room work for 4 years in Eastern North Carolina. And again, a great clinical experience and not something I wouldn't trade at all. So when I went back to my radiology residency at the University of North Carolina in the early 1980s, I felt very equipped to know kind of what all the referring physicians needed from me, whether they be pediatricians or neurosurgeons, et cetera. So I trained at the University of North Carolina. It was the last year that you could do radiology residency in 3 years, which I did, and then joined a practice in Hickory, North Carolina, Catawba Radiology Associates, where I practiced for the next 30 years. It was a 5-person group when I joined, 18 when I left and took the job with the college. And so there was considerable expansion and progressive subspecialization, though most of us did an awful lot of things, not a single subspecialty. We covered 3 different hospitals and 2 outpatient imaging centers, so we couldn't subspecialize, but so far. And my primary focus in our practice was interventional radiology, which, as I say, was really kind of a love that I developed during my residency training. Meanwhile, I became very active and involved in the ACR. I had a mentor in the practice I joined, had Dr. Hal Owsley, who was a tremendous mentor and was very involved with the college. And over years, became involved with the North Carolina chapter, going through the leadership ascent there, and then began participating in national ACR committees, commissions, and then took on the role of chair of the economics commission for the college, which I served in for 6 years, terminating in my presidency year in 2003, 2004. So the volunteerism was a very important part of my career. Simultaneously, was very involved in our hospital our board. Went through the kind of chief of staff role in Ascent, and I would encourage all those who are listening, particularly the young radiologists to look for opportunities to do that. It really put our practice in a very good place relative to the hospital administration. So then, as I say, of course, after finishing my volunteerism for the ACR, did served in a number of roles for the RSNA on the Research and Education Foundation Board of Trustees, and then subsequently on the RSNA Board of Directors, and was actually in the middle of my 8-year stint with the RSNA board when the CEO position for the college opened when Dr. Neiman was stepping down, and it seemed like a really natural second career move, which I was really pleased that they asked me to take on in 2014. So, been somewhat of a circuitous route, but hopefully that gives the listeners a look at my background.
So many things stand out, and I've known you for a very, very long time, well before you became the CEO. And even though you still tell me almost every time we talk to call you Bill, I can't call you anything but Dr. Thorwarth because that's how I met you many years ago when I started. But the two things that really stood out to me among the many talking about your background is one, that your dad was a radiologist. And, I think we kind of joke a little bit about it internally within our government relations department, or even sometimes when we talk with members of Congress on the Hill or congressional staff, that, the profession has changed. And I don't know if it's more kind of our guessing that this is the trend or if it's actually a thing. But I just remember when I first started with the college, and maybe the first 5 to 7 years, it felt like there were a lot of what I call like a legacy, right? Like, dad practiced, now I practice type of thing. Obviously, you've got the Dr. K's of the world and folks like that still, but I feel like it's less now than it was then. And is that a fair observation, or is that inaccurate?
I think there's still quite a few legacy, and I've talked to a number of folks both in radiology residency and in our young professional section of the college who's a parent, or sometimes even two parents were radiologists. I still think it's a very exciting specialty and is conveyed to the medical students as a real opportunity. But it's very different. I jokingly used to say that my dad's practice of radiology was fundamentally bones and barium, and of course now and the radiologists, basically would come in and read a stack of films. My father, when he was on call, used to say the most important call he'd get was that the processor was broken, and now radiologists are 24/7 service.
Yeah.
We all know that, and I think folks who are considering radiologists really have to understand the extent of commitment that it is, and but also the opportunity to be such an integral part of virtually every significant healthcare episode. None of my children went into radiology. I'll say, I guess the legacy stopped with me, but I do think that many folks really that I've talked to have seen the excitement and enthusiasm that their parent had for their profession.
And so the second thing that stood out to me when you're going through your background, and obviously saying this again, we've known each other and worked with each other for so long, is just the tremendous amount of volunteer engagement that you had throughout your career with the ACR, with, RSNA, even with, I think, were you involved with AMA stuff as well? Or,
Yes,
okay.
yeah,
It, it,
I didn't get into that side of it, but yep, that was a
and
significant chunk as
so,
well.
that's always kind of a tricky deal with us now as we're dealing with folks who are so busy, almost maybe busier than ever, and trying to get them engaged. Obviously, this is a RADVOCACY podcast, so we always are thinking about how things relate to advocacy and getting folks engaged, getting our members to participate, whether it's a Hill Day, whether it's at the state legislature, whether it's with the PAC or whatever it may be, ACR commissions and committees, like you said. But kind of where did you said you had a mentor, and I think the mentors are really instrumental in that. But was there anything else outside of that mentor that kind of made you feel this urge or need to pursue these opportunities that like you did?
No, great question, Ted. Because I can tell you that my wife Nancy will commonly quote me when I started with the practice at Catawba Radiology of saying, "Oh, I'm just going to practice radiology, and I'll leave the politics and stuff to somebody else." And that obviously did not end up being my end path. But no, I think I became convinced very early that if you're not involved beyond your clinical care, that you're going to be fundamentally a commodity and vulnerable. And so, whether it be in your community, and I recently gave a talk, and I'll refer the listeners to the the Radiology Leadership Institute webinar we just did on, for the young professional section specifically, of the importance of involvement beyond clinical care. But I became very convinced that if you aren't at the old expression, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I thought that both personally and from my practice standpoint, that was very important. The expansion into more national ACR involvement really, I think, was I saw as an opportunity to look at our profession from 30,000 feet, or for medicine overall, not just radiology. And as you pointed out, I was very involved with the economics world of coding and reimbursement, and sat on the AMA's CPT editorial panel for 8 years as a member, and then 4 years as chair, which developed the codes for all specialties. So our visibility to be an ambassador for radiology outside of our own professional organizations really, I think, was both personally satisfying, but I think also really helpful if you go out there and put a credible face on our profession through those kinds of experiences. It really does help. And even things like community involvement. Again, during that presentation I described, I made note of radiologists need to get involved in their local community theater, or whether it's coaching sports teams, kids' sports teams, because you meet people in your community that may be decision makers as to whether or not a particular local manufacturer wants to cover a certain screening procedure, CT colonography or whatever. Do you know what I mean? That those kinds of relationships are invaluable. But again, going back to the concept of looking at radiology and medicine from 30,000 feet was very satisfying. And though I enjoyed my clinical work till the last day, absolutely, that really was a great component of my experience.
And so we talk about all the things that you've done, and you've done a ton for us specifically with the ACR Government Relations Office and RADPAC. Again, not just in your capacity as CEO and being very supportive of our efforts, but also going back to when you were a member. You would host members of Congress at your practice. You would do fundraising events and kind of things of that nature. So when we always think advocacy, we think of it, at least me, think of it kind of in the DC office type of framework. But you're also kind of in such a unique position as CEO at the college, where I think it's advocating for radiology isn't just a political thing, a legislative thing, a regulatory thing, but it just radiology as a whole, just the value of radiology in the healthcare delivery system and all of that. And so, when you're going representing the college at various conferences and meetings, both throughout the country and even internationally. Can you talk about that? Just the process that you go through to kind of almost defend our value and shout from the mountaintops how important radiology is when maybe oftentimes it's overlooked, or maybe there's some perceptions about radiology that maybe just aren't true. So I would be curious about your experiences in that regard when it comes to advocating for radiology on a more 30,000 foot kind of global scale.
No, it really is an important part of certainly my role currently, but also I think it's an important role for every radiologist to look for opportunities to demonstrate and, as you say, shout from the mountaintops the value of radiology. I mean, we literally, radiologists sit as coordinators of virtually every significant episode of patient care. And if we don't take advantage of the opportunity to point that out, some of the kind of old guard perceptions of radiology of 8 to 5, first car out of the parking lot, hard to reach. I mean, you can see it on the TV shows. I remember watching things like House or ER, where
Right.
we tried to reach the radiologist, but we couldn't get him. He was on the golf course, kind of
Right.
perception. And that's a perception that we've worked very hard to shake. Also, I think that we have to show ourselves as contributing to the advancement of medicine. So through our research efforts, we have to highlight those. God knows the things like the lung cancer screening trial that now has demonstrated the value of that, or going further back, the DMIS, the digital mammography trials, those types of things that radiology as a specialty has done have really positioned radiologists to be now at a whole new a threshold of going into population health, which again, I think, and as you point out, the advocacy is not just your state legislature or the federal legislature or regulatory bodies. It's advocating for radiology as a profession across the board. So it's and I think the other thing I'll go back and say is I think I point out an article I actually wrote for one of the very early versions or editions of JACR in I think 2005. I had written a paper about as far as financial support of advocacy. I wrote a paper that said if every radiology practice, and I was particularly focused on private practice because that was my experience, said if every radiology practice allocated 1% of net revenues to research, education, and political advocacy, we would be the 800-pound gorilla. I mean, that would be at that time on a rough back of the envelope calculation about $100 million a year, and wouldn't change one radiologist's life. As far as so, I think that, and I quite frankly got out on the speaking trail, for various invitations and the like, and that was one of my major pitches. And some other very notable folks, Bill Bradley, Dave Levin, and others picked up on that. We couldn't quite get that brush fire started, but I'd love to see it get started now.
Well, we're trying every day to start it. You know
I
that.
know that.
So one thing that I think is also interesting is just the technological advances. It's interesting. I know it's not apples to apples comparison, maybe apples to oranges, still in the fruit family. But when COVID came and telehealth kind of became this all the rage, this hot new thing that was a shiny toy that people on the Hill were like, wow, this is great. We had no idea that this could happen. I was like, we've been doing teleradiology for like 20 plus years, like easily. And, it is interesting, even when I talk to people on the Hill, and I need to be careful. We may have to edit this out. We'll see how this goes. But, I say, look, there's nothing against, let's say, a family physician's office. They play a very critical role in the delivery of healthcare. They're the first. Oftentimes, they're the first person that someone sees when they're in need of healthcare, and then they obviously get either taken care of or maybe they get referred to a specialist. But I said, you go to a family practice, there's not a ton to see necessarily. You see a ton depressor, you see the tissue paper on the seat. That's about it. You come to a radiology practice, you're going to see some pretty cool technology, some pretty cool toys. That is a very noticeable difference with our specialty and just how technologically sophisticated and advanced we are and continue to become, to your point. And I think that sometimes we almost take that for granted. But when we have members of Congress come and visit a practice, they said, wow, I had no idea. And then, of course, the follow up to that is, well, if we keep these cuts in place, how are you guys going to afford all this expensive equipment? And we say, well, that's a really good question. That's our question to you, right? So, in kind of speaking in terms of members of Congress, I kind of, when I think about your role as the CEO, I think it's, especially the last few years in particular, but probably it's always been this case since you started. I liken it to being a member of Congress, right? So you come in as a member of Congress, probably close to 50% of your community and constituency is going to not like you because, you have a Republican or a Democrat tag to your name. Regardless if they've known you in the community forever as a nice person, and maybe, again, like to your point, you coached a sports team or, you were involved in other community activities. But immediately once you take that leadership role, and you're associated with a party, you're going to kind of have that issue with a good part of your population. And the analogy, in my opinion, that makes your job so difficult is we have a very, very big membership with a very wide spectrum of personal interests, professional interests, and sometimes they're a little bit at conflict. And so it's a very difficult thing to navigate and maneuver. I know, just kind of more anecdotally talking over the years to different members, and if it's a a radiology member who's in academics, they say, well, the college just cares about private practice. And if I talk to someone in private practice, they'll say, oh, the college just cares about the academic folks, right? So it's always kind of one of those things like you always feel like the other person's getting more favor than yourself. So in that regard, I mean, through your tenure as the CEO, how have you kind of navigated that, handled that? It's a difficult place to be because everyone's a member. We're doing our best to serve everyone's interest and the greater good, not just for us, but for the patients. Kind of walk us through that very delicate dance.
Yeah, it is. It is a dynamic, and you have to accept the fact when you're in a role like CEO for the college that there are going to be a vast spectrum of opinions, and some very firmly held. And we've seen a couple of those that have come actually to the ACR Council for discussion. That there are really differences of opinion. I think that if a couple of things that, as far as the CEO role, I think that my job, if you will, is to make sure that we keep the discussion civil and respectful. I think it's really important that we make sure that we demonstrate the professionalism of our organization and of our members in that way. And I think that we have to make sure that we keep the patient care and the delivery, equitable delivery of high quality care as our North Star. And if we can do that and keep those discussions that may be sometimes contentious, fact based and not visceral and kind of gut based, I think we're much better off as an organization, and will be much more effective. So, I hope that during my little more than 9 years now in this role, I've conveyed that message to both our membership, but outside, like you say, to whether it be to members of Congress. If we go up there and say that we're trying to argue for such and such a coverage decision, or such and such a political aspect of mitigating cuts, it's because the end product is that equitable access to high quality radiological care. And we just have to keep that as the real cornerstone of our arguments. So sometimes we'll say that when the arguments get a little more contentious, you have to have individual conversations with people. Say, let me just understand where you're coming from and what your objective is, and let's try to put that in the bigger picture. Do you know what I mean? And I think that making sure that we keep those conversations very, very respectful and productive is really the best way to get to the solutions. Going to your comment earlier about the cost of equipment and the like relative to other specialties. The other thing I'll throw in there is we have to be sure that we continue to innovate, because if we're not, supporting NIH funding, the appropriate research to advance medicine as a whole and radiology in particular, I think that we're really just treading water. And everybody, the old expression, if you're not progressing, you're moving backwards, definitely applies in our specialty in particular.
And having been at the college for a long period of time myself, 20 years this fall, which is crazy. I remember I told Bill Shields in our legal department when he interviewed me. He said, "Can you guarantee you'll stay here 5 years?" I was like, "Yeah, I think I can do that." And I didn't know, and I doubt he knew I would do more than four times, almost four times that. But I think the one common theme that I've heard in, a lot of the relationships I have with a lot of our members, and, I think sometimes they tell me stuff that they feel that they can tell me that maybe they wouldn't want to tell others within the college because of personal relationships. But the one common theme has always been, even if I may not agree with this direction or that direction of a decision or whatever it may be, I think people feel like their voice is heard, like that they've had a real honest and fair shake to communicate from their perspective. And if it's something that may not be consistent with where we're going, that they at least had a chance to voice it. And I think really that's all you can do and provide. And I think people appreciate that, knowing that, again, you're not going to get everything on your wish list. My kids definitely don't get everything on their wish list all the time when they ask us for stuff. And we don't get everything on our wish list when we go to members of Congress. That's not the way the world works. But I think if people feel like they've been really fairly treated and have had their voice heard, then they're okay with the outcome.
I couldn't agree with you more to that. And we've got actually a project going on within the college, as you know, called the Convener of Conversations. It's a kind of an accelerator for our strategic plan objectives. And just being able to make sure that we realize that there's a full spectrum of opinions and interests out there, but affording everyone the opportunity to voice that, say that it's been appropriately considered, and then moving ahead with what's best for the specialty and the patients that are served.
So I want to finish with a couple quick
Okay.
questions. I want to be respectful of your time. So one question is, of probably many challenges, what has been maybe one of the biggest challenges you faced at the college?
I think that the challenge of the increasing emphasis on productivity by radiologists and making that challenging for radiologists to be patient facing and interacting with patients. And that has continued and honestly will continue. I think that we know that there's going to be a shortage of radiologists. And how do we address that workforce issue and utilize all of the kind of opportunities and capabilities that we have? And I'll use the obviously the artificial intelligence slash augmented intelligence and our great data science institute as an example. I think we have to look for ways to preserve the fact that patients understand and know their radiologist and know the contribution that their radiologist is making to their health care and to their health. So I think that making sure that that stays a significant part of the conversation and doesn't get lost in the sort of productivity requirements that are required in this kind of very high pressure. And you pointed out earlier, as far as the volunteerism, our members are very, very busy people doing their best to provide that care. We need to be sure that we're utilizing every possible avenue to make sure that we've optimized using those talents.
And then what would you say would be maybe your one or two, biggest achievements as CEO? Something you feel like, hey, when I'm getting ready to transition out of this role next year, I can look back and really feel a good sense of pride that I was able to accomplish X, whatever that may be.
I think if I were to name two, I'd say one would be our external relationships. I think that I've had the opportunity to get, based on my AMA background, had some credibility there, have continued to be very involved with our ACR's AMA delegation and the Radiology Section Council. And I do think that the visibility of radiology in the larger medical sphere has really increased. I've had also the opportunity with the Council of Medical Specialty Societies, which is an organization of 50 different specialty society organizations, and have served on their board for the last several years. And I think really had the opportunity to, as we talked about, to have radiology recognized as a key cog in the wheel of healthcare delivery. So I think that's one. The second I would say is culture. I hope that you were saying earlier about Call Me Bill. I hope that I've developed within the staff of the college and even to our external stakeholders a culture of really contributing, participatory, engaged team effort that we have at the college, and that's really been a real again major part of my efforts, but also a major reward for me to see that evolve.
Yeah, so I can speak to the second one much more than the first one. Obviously, being an employee, you know, uh, having been through, uh, the pre-COVID era, and then the COVID era, and then the post-COVID era. I will say that I've always thought of you as the Southern gentleman of Southern gentlemen, even though somehow you're from my area and I'm not a Southern gentleman by any stretch. But I've always thought that about you, and I've always respected that about you, and I think you've brought that connectedness with our employees. And I think that that's been really important through the different phases of when you've been at the college, and some really difficult, you know, situations and work environments to navigate, and how things have really been very fluid and have changed pretty dramatically from how they used to be. And I think that that's been kind of the rock that's enabled us to continue to move forward. And again, to feel that connectedness is so important. We talk about that a lot in our household. What is a separator When I talk about that with my kids, with themselves to other people who are their peers that they'll be competing against one day, trying to get into college, against another person, or trying to get a job against another person. What's the separator? And connectedness, the ability to connect, is a really important one in my opinion. And so I appreciate what you've done in that regard for the college as a whole, and obviously for me personally.
Well, thanks. Ted. It's been my pleasure.
So let's end on our normal way of ending our podcast, and that's what we call our lightning round, affectionately. So I'm going to give you four categories, and quick response, your knee jerk reaction to what I'm asking, and I'm curious to see what your answers will be. Favorite food.
Well, Ted, this won't be quite as quick, but we actually did this in our family, sitting around the table at Christmas about 2 years ago.
Okay.
Someone said, "Okay, everybody, you're on a desert island. You have to eat the same meal every meal until and you can never get off the island." And everybody went around and they had their special this and their special that. My answer was banana splits. I have
Oh
a
wow.
thing. I have a
Never would have guessed it.
I have a thing for banana splits, which unfortunately can periodically challenge my waistline.
Wow, I never would have guessed that. I was thinking like a nice Italian food or something. Favorite place to travel.
I'd have to say two, really. One is Hawaii. We've had the opportunity to be there a number of times with various CME meetings or board meetings, et cetera, and really do love that. And the second is Tuscany in Italy. Just a fantastic place to go, sit back, relax, honestly, and just see gorgeous countryside.
Okay. Favorite hobby and activity.
Well, honestly, per the discussion earlier, my hobbies and activities were really centered around volunteerism, and obviously they kept doing that, so I must have been enjoying it. There's no question about that. I think that I really did have enjoyed though. I used to work on old cars, and I'd love to kind of get back to that
Oh, cool.
potentially in retirement, and also back to playing a bit of tennis, which used to be a real cornerstone of my physical activity.
Okay, so let's go to the last one. Favorite saying, favorite quote. This could be a well-known, popular one. This could be one that you created on your own as a dad, or or whatever the case may be, that you like to say or that you use a lot.
Well, Ted, you may recognize this because I actually put it in one of my emails to all staff a couple of weeks ago. It is that life is an experiment without a control. When you make decisions, when you come to a branch point, you don't know what the other path would have taken you, but you need to look ahead and not look back and worry about what the other path might have done, and really concentrate on how to optimize the path that you've selected. So, yeah, as I say, that was actually said to me a number of years ago, sitting at a poolside during a radiology conference, and I just really have latched on to that one.
Love it. Well, Dr. Thorwarth, I want to thank you so much for joining us, for your time. I know obviously it's in high demand and you're very busy, but I appreciate you professionally, all you've done for the profession and for the college. I appreciate you personally and all you've done for me with our relationship over 10, 15, 20 years of working together. So thank you very much for all you've done. And I appreciate, again, you joining us today on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Ted. I really appreciate it, and really appreciate what you do and your entire team does on behalf of all radiologists, all of our members, and all radiologists in general, and most importantly, the impact on the patients that are served.